All right. So we are looking at doing a little bit of like reading documentation and how do we figure stuff out. And we started with box shadow and text shadow. We want to learn about shadow. And when we started reading about text shadow, we saw, hey, text decoration. So what's text decoration? And text decoration does things like this right here, where we have none or underline, or we also have overline, underline, line through. And then line through made me think about the S element, the del element, because right here, we could put a del around something and get a line through it. We could put an S around something and put a line through it. And then we could use like this div here as text decoration line through. And so when you use all three of those, you get the same stuff. You get a line through text. Well, what's the difference between them? A little bit of a rabbit hole, but we went from shadow, and we were looking at text shadow, and then we saw text decorations mentioned. So what's text decoration? And we saw that that's like, what are the options? The text decoration options are underline, overline, line through, blink, right? And so the line through kind of led me to these MDN elements where we have S. So it's a line through it, represent things that are no longer relevant or no longer accurate, which could be different than a document edit, maybe, right? So you have to figure that out where something was deleted, but you want a record that it used to be there. So that would do a line through, the del will do a line through, the S will do a line through, and text decoration will do a line through. So just kind of an interesting thing to note, and you'll have to sort of sort out which one to use when you need a line through something. I just have to, for curiosity's sake, see blink. It's not really blinking, is it? I'm disappointed. I thought maybe the blink would still be there, because blink is one of the things that lists there. Line through or blink. So kind of interesting, but I've always heard blink's been deprecated, so that was kind of surprising to see it there in the documentation.
Wouldn't that be a JavaScript?
Yeah, you could do blink in JavaScript, but blink used to be an HTML tag where you can make stuff blink. So text shadow property, that's what we're doing here today, is we want to learn about text shadow. Add shadows to text, and each shadow is specified as an offset from the text along with optional color and blur radius. And multiple shadows are applied front to back with the first specified shadow on top. The property applies to first line and first pseudo elements also. Initial value is none. So here we have some examples. Text shadow 1 pix, 1 pix, 2 pix black, where we would have offset Y, blur radius, color. Oh, offset X, X, Y, blur radius, color. So let's just try that. So let's get some text. So I'm going to come down to text shadow and just make this like O2 is the first example. And for my index, I'm interested in just having an H1 with the letter A. And then for my main CSS, there's nothing on it. I want to center that in the center of the page and make it big. So the first thing I want to do is HTML body, height 100%. This is becoming my mantra. And now I want to do body, display flex, and the default direction, flex direction, is row, and no wrap. That's cool. And justify content operates on the primary axis, which is the horizontal, since it's flex directions row. The primary axis is horizontal, and so I'm going to do center on that. And align items operates on the cross axes, and so that is vertical, since we're dealing with a row. The cross axis vertical. So that should have centered everything in the middle of the page. And let's take a look, and there's my letter A in the middle of the page. I love it. And if I wanted to, I could put some borders around things just to see where the different elements were. If I was curious, I could say HTML, border, 2 pix, solid red. And I could say body, 2-pick solid black, and I could say H1. So that kind of shows me where the borders of those things are. And you'll notice the black is not right next to the red. Why? Box sizing. So I could come up here and I could do a little bit of a reset. And the resets are good kind of right at the top before anything happens. And I could say we have our content, then we have our padding, and then we have our border. I'm not going to do that because that'll maybe zero out borders, but then I'll have our margin. And that should move that right next to it. It's cool. And I could do box, sizing, border box. So if I change them. So now I'm going to make my H1 a little bit bigger in size. So I'm going to make my HTML font size 4 VWs, and my H1 will be font size 2 rem. Well, 1 rem will be exactly whatever 4 VWs is. 2 rem, 4 rem, 5 rem, 8 rem. So now, changes. But VWs are only 80% of browsers. So keep that in mind. Width. Yeah. Viewport width. And so now I'm ready to start applying some shadow. And so we could try, you know, what we just learned, text shadow. And we could say 1 pix, solid black. I think that's what it was. No, I'm getting a red line. It's down that text decoration, text shadow. 1 pix, blur radius 2 pixels, and then the color. Blur radius 2 pixels, and then the color. And let's make it red, so it stands out a little bit. And we could get rid of these borders now. And just organizational wise, I like in sequence. Everybody understand that? So you can see there's a little bit of red border there. And we could play with this like we saw the other day briefly to see it. So if it's XY, that's going to pop it out to the right. And bring this back to 2 or something, or 5. And if that's the Y, it's going to pop it down to the bottom. And if this is the blur, fuzzy, it's a lot of blur. Or less blur. And of course, you know, make it more symmetrical. But a pretty cool little addition, you know, for text shadow. So it is May 5th, and I'm going to add that into GitHub. Yeah.
It was left offset, right offset, blur?
XY blur color.
Okay.
And that's right, I just get that from right here. So XY blur color. And you can see again here we have color XY blur, so you could do it that way, I guess. Or color XY color with no blur, or color XY, or just XY for default color and blur. So it's basically XY blur color for a font. All right, so now I'll commit this to GitHub. And so I could do a git status, git add -- all, git commit -m, and adds text shadow example, and git push. Cool. And if I go look at GitHub, 39 days, amazing. This guy does not miss a day. I've had a lot of 1 and 2 contribution days recently. Little bursts. Every 6 months I go through a little burst. So the next thing which would be interesting to do would be just to make a few notes. So I've added a little, I think that's all we need right here. I've added a little README file, and it's Markdown. How many people are familiar with Markdown? Okay, so Markdown is just HTML is a markup language, hypertext markup language. Markdown is another markup language, even though it's called Markdown. So a markup language is just marks up text to be formatted in a certain way, or to maybe markup is you know, to put elements around it that tells it like this, you know, to categorize content. It's heading 1, heading 2. It's a paragraph, right? Maybe that's what markup does, and Markdown does formatting. Because markup isn't supposed to be, you know, HTML is not supposed to do formatting. That's an interesting question. Markup versus Markdown. What's the difference? Ooh, that's the one I want. Markup and Markdown are not the same thing. Markup's used on web to build HTML pages. And where's Markdown?
It's a way to style text on the web.
Yeah, Markdown is a type of markup. So Markdown's a type of markup. Anyhow, that's just a. You could do a Markdown GitHub cheat sheet. There's a GitHub cheat sheet with Markdown.
Mastering Markdown GitHub guide.
There you go. You're like a step ahead of me. Thank you. That's not the one I want. I just want the cheat sheet, which is right here. So here is what you could do. Headers, lists, emphasis. So basically, you know, it's what you would use in email. Like if I wanted to make something stand out in email, I'll put a little star on each side of the word, right? You know, make sure star, every in star, you know, bucket is filled, right? And so that made that stand out. Well, it's the same kind of stuff you hear, right? So if I wanted to make something emphasis, bold is 2, italicized is 1, right? So there's other ways you could use underscores, but I just stick with asterisks. Or you could use headings, H1, H2, H3, and it's with just pound signs. Okay.
It's like a language pre-HTML?
It's like if you have a website and you want users to be able to format stuff that they submit, but you don't want them sending you HTML tags, because when people are allowed to start entering element tags, then they might put in a script tag, and in that script tag they might put some JavaScript to execute, which, you know, could wreak havoc with your site. And that's called cross-site scripting when somebody does that. So instead of having them enter tags, you say you can't enter tags, but you could use this notation and it'll format. And then I could take this notation and turn it into HTML. And there's APIs where you could take Markdown and get HTML back. So I want a little document here, right, that's going to show a little bit about text shadow. So I'll just grab this example right here. I like that. And backticks mean code, and I'm just going to say this is HTML code. And so I'm going to drop in that little example. And that is actually, this is CSS, because that's a CSS comment. And then I'll come up here and just grab this. And I'll do a heading and call this text shadow. But I think I'll stick with that since that's the tag. And then I'll just put in text shadow property adds shadows to text. It accepts a comma separated list. X, Y, radius, blur, blur radius, color. Each shadow is specified as an offset from the text along with optional color and blur. Multiple shadows are applied front to back with the first shadow on top. It applies to that too. All right, so now I could commit this, git add all, git commit, git push. And if I go and look at GitHub, we have a text shadow. And so it created that little document, right? So it's a little formatting, right? Because I put a pound sign front text shadow, so that made it a heading 1, and I just had some text, and I had 3 backticks in CSS, and so it formatted that as code that I dropped in there and knows it's like CSS code. So that's how you'd use Markdown and how it works nice with GitHub. So when you push things to GitHub and it's got an MD extension, Markdown, right? Like this file here had a readme.md extension. And so it knows, oh, that's Markdown. So kind of cool, eh? All right, so the next thing I want you guys to do, a little challenge for coding, is I want you to do this exact example where we put the letter A in the middle of a page and we added a red shadow to it. But I want you to do it the black box. So make the box out of a div, give it a width and a height to make the box box black, and give it a red shadow like this. And read about box shadow and MDN to see if it's different. And we'll take like 10 minutes to have you create it, and then I'll create it up here. And I think we'll be owning how to add shadows to something. How cool is that? Mm-hmm.